In this video, I wanted to give you a quick simple explanation of why n-1 is used when calculating the standard deviation of a sample. You might be wondering why n-1 needs to be used when the data is from a sample rather than an entire population. So, in some situations, the standard deviation of an entire population is needed to complete a formula. In some situations, you have to calculate the standard deviation of a population and then plug that into a bigger formula to complete that bigger formula. We'll actually get to some of those situations later. In those situations, the standard deviation of the entire population is not available to you because you don't have data from all population members. You only have data from a sample. And if you only have data from a sample, you can't calculate anything about the entire population. And in these situations, what you do is you take the data from your sample and you use it to calculate the standard deviation of your sample data, and then you use that sample standard deviation as a substitute for the unknown population standard deviation. You take the standard deviation that you've calculated with your sample and you plug it into that bigger formula as a substitute or as a replacement. And it turns out that if you use n-1 to calculate your sample standard deviation, it ends up being a better, or it tends to be a more accurate substitute for the population standard deviation if you've calculated it with n-1. If you don't use n-1, it tends to be a less accurate substitute for the unknown population standard deviation. So you're just trying to make a better substitute for the unknown number that you need. And that's really all there is to it. And we'll be getting into some of these situations later in our class. Basically, the n-1 brings up the value of the sample standard deviation a little bit, and that helps it be a more accurate substitution because if you don't use n-1, what happens is that the sample standard deviation tends to be lower than the population standard deviation. It tends to underestimate it. But when you use n-1, it gives that sample standard deviation that you're calculating a little bit of a boost. So it's less likely to be an underestimate of the population standard deviation. And yeah, just let me know if you have any questions. And next, we'll be moving forward to z-scores. And when we get to z-scores, we'll be continuing to use this idea of a standard deviation.